beneath a sky torn open by the impact fire of falling wreckage and static-ridden radio distress calls. Sergeant Rourke trudged through the ash-streaked battlefield that had once been green Montana forest, his pulse tracker flickering erratically as something not human moved in the embers ahead. It wasn't the enemy, not exactly, not this time, because when he found her, curled inside the fractured shell of a translucent pod, hair like silver flame, and skin glowing with faint bioluminescence, she didn't scream or attack. She just looked up at him with eyes older than Earth itself, and whispered a word he didn't understand but felt deep in his chest like a forgotten dream. And against every code, every warning, every buried trauma from wars past, Rourke wrapped his jacket around her and carried her away from the wreckage, not knowing she was no scout, no refugee, but a runaway princess from the Velari ascendancy, a species whose diplomacy masked daggers, and who had already marked Earth as pre-assimilation Zone 04. And yet, as days turned into hidden weeks in Velari, he called her that. She never gave a real name, healed in secret among rusted barracks and fading rebellion scars. She and Rourke became entangled in a quiet, intimacy-sharing old vinyl music, mapping stars, touching scars until one night, under flickering blackout lanterns, she told him, "You don't understand, Rourke. My people are coming, and they think you're parasites." And he laughed at first, thought it was fear talking. But then the sky cracked again, this time not with falling escape pods, but descending motherships the size of cities, blocking out the stars they used to whisper under. And all at once, Rourke realized he'd not only fallen in love with the enemy, he'd hidden their queen. He stood frozen as the atmosphere fractured, not just in light and gravity, but in meaning. Because the ships weren't just arriving, they were positioning, locking into geosynchronous orbit with military precision. And in that moment, Sergeant Rourke understood the truth Velari had tried to tell him, with trembling hands and tearless eyes, that her people, her kind, had never stopped watching Earth, had never stopped preparing, had just waited until the world tore itself enough from the inside to justify intervention. And now, that intervention came with orbital rail cannons, with drop pods full of genetically engineered warriors, with neural dampening signals already silencing Earth's satellites. But even in the chaos, in the horror of the first coordinated strikes on major cities, New York's skyline cleaved in half, Beijing consumed by plasma nets, Paris folded. In subdimensional flux, Rourke couldn't hate her, because she was still the girl who asked him what chocolate tasted like, who slept curled in his bunker like a ghost of hope, who once kissed his broken knuckles and whispered she wished her world had made someone like him. And now she was breaking, too. Crying not with sobs, but with shimmering blood that pulsed at her temples and screamed through her veins as her genetic seal began to activate, marking her as Velari Royal, calling to the fleets above that their sovereign was alive and among the enemy. And Rourke saw it. That moment her identity betrayed them both, as his base's old auto-sentries triggered, targeting her with red intent, and his squad burst in yelling contact. But he raised his arms, shielded her with his body, shouting, "Stand down. She's not hostile," while bullets sprayed inches from her skull, and the entire war began to funnel through this one impossible bond, a human soldier who once hated aliens, and an alien heir who once vowed to never love a human, and with the two of them now fugitives of both Earth and the Velari fleet. They fled into the ruins of Colorado's collapsed bunker cities, hunted by drones and distrusted by both sides, surviving off stolen supplies and shattered memories, always moving, always hiding, until one night, deep underground, with oxygen thinning and hope bleeding dry, Velari whispered, "I can stop the war if I give myself back to them." And Rourke grabbed her shoulders, stared into eyes that made him feel like the last real man alive, and said, "Then we both, or not at all." And for the first time in either of their lives, they made a vow to their people, not to their species, but to each other. Their sanctuary didn't last, not in a war measured in orbital strikes and psychic broadcasts, and just after dawn, the sky lit up in ultraviolet veins that only Velari could see. Her pupils narrowing as the command call hit her nervous system like lightning across a nerve. The unmistakable signal of the crown mind, the mental projection of her father, the Velari Emperor reaching directly into her mind from orbit. His voice not in words but in commands, absolute and ancient. And as she screamed and crumpled against the bunker wall, Rourke held her trembling body and realized she wasn't a prisoner of species, or she was shackled to a hive bloodline that was using her neural code to triangulate their position. And within minutes, sleek obsidian stalkships descended from the sky, cutting through steel and dirt like paper, whispering promises in a language Rourke didn't understand but knew in his bones meant death, and he ran with her, half carrying, half dragging, into old service tunnels where rats had fled and memories hung in mold, until they stumbled into a forgotten AI uplink chamber. Tech, pre-war, still pulsing faintly and there, with desperation fueling. Rourke slammed his hand into the console and began splicing military-grade encryption with Velari neurocode, forcing the systems to listen to a voice not mentored. Hers, the princess, the traitor, the human lover, and through crude signal boosters and jury-rigged speech, they hijacked Earth's last resistance network to broadcast the truth, not just that Velari wanted conquest, but that Velari herself had chosen humanity, had fallen for one of them, and in doing so, they ignited something raw and terrifying across both sides, hope, but also rage, because as they fled again, this time across the wastelands of shattered Denver, they were pursued not just by alien kill squads, but by human radicals who saw her as the key to the vision, the witch who enchanted one of Earth's finest. And in the blood-soaked chase that followed, Velari saved Rourke more times than he saw her, using forgotten psychic glyphs to tear through steel, to twist bullets in midair, to shield filling lungs with alien biosm, until finally they reached a hidden rebel enclave in the Rockies, where Earth's last generals and AI remnants were planning one final strike, not a battle to win, but a suicide mission to detonate the Velari ship's core with an experimental gravity plotter. And as the plan unfolded, the generals gave Rourke a choice: join them and bomb the heart of the enemy, or walk with her. And when he turned to Velari and saw her eyes wet not with tears but with the weight of galaxies, she whispered, "If you choose Earth, I will never hold it against you." But when he looked back at the table, his fingers already resting on the detonator key, he said one word: no. And that word would become legend, because instead of choosing sides, he chose a third path: surrender himself to the Velari Emperor face and offer the unthinkable a blood pact, his DNA in exchange hers, a genetic fusion ceremony that could rewrite the Velari hive code and make Earth part of the royal bloodline, not its conquest. But for that to happen, they emerged from the cold mountain base under a blood-orange sky, Rourke and Velari walking side by side into the landing zone prepared by her father's fleet, its anti-grav spires humming like ancient songbirds of war. And though her hands trembled, her voice never cracked as she transmitted her DNA signature to the orbital crown mine, summoning the Emperor's presence in physical form, a massive, robed being whose flesh shimmered with bioluminescent circuits, and whose face was carved like starlight held captive by duty. And the Emperor spoke not to Rourke, but to Velari, in tones that pulsed inside the bones rather than ears, declaring, "You offer your lifeblood for this parasite's plea." And she, stepping forward, said simply, "I offer my love." And that word love rippled through the assembled Velari council like static through glass. For their kind had long since sterilized emotion in the pursuit of galactic order, and now one of their own, a royal at that, threatened to corrupt the entire bloodline with human irrationality. And in that moment, Velari's father knew this was not negotiation, it was rebellion, and, though he permitted the ceremony to begin, it was only because the law of their ancestors demanded it. If a Velari royal performed the joining ritual with a foreign being, and survived, the pact was bound and irreversible, and so beneath two moons. With drones circling and soldiers on both sides, watching in silence, Velari and Rourke stepped into the ancient joining circle, cut their palms with obsidian blades, and placed their hands together, their blood fusing in a bioplasmic light that ignited the air around them, unlocking an ancestral neural gate that linked their minds, souls, and genetic templates in a blaze of searing visions, his childhood pain, her imperial training, his nightmares, her dreams of freedom, his fear of dying alone, her longing to be loved without fear, and as their minds melded, they saw something neither expected, a possible future, one where Velari's DNA, altered by Rourke's chaotic human code, could rewrite the Crown Mind's domination protocols and free not just Earth, but countless worlds enslaved by Velari conquest. But just as the ceremony neared completion, a shriek tore across the circle. General Katha, Velari's father's warlord, had broken ranks, launching a hidden plasma bolt at Rourke, screaming, "No, she is tainted." And the bolt flew straight toward his heart, only to be intercepted by Velari herself, her body spinning in slow motion, arms outstretched. As the blast pierced her side, not fatal but close, and the circle shattered in a shockwave of pain and betrayal as Rourke caught her falling body, screaming her name while Velari's father watched in silence, unmoved, calculating, alien and ill. Rourke stood, blood still dripping from his fused hand, and roared at the Emperor, "You want obedience? You'll have it when I burn your goddamn ships from the sky." And in that instant, the pact, though unfinished, had altered them both forever. Velari was no longer heir to the throne, and Rourke was no longer just a soldier. He was now the carrier of Velari royal DNA, a living threat to the Empire, and every ship in the sky suddenly turned its weapons not on Earth, but on him. The skies above Earth turned crimson as every Velari ship locked onto Rourke's DNA signal, now broadcast across 1,000 enemy neural links as a living anomaly and unstable, forbidden fusion of human and royal Velari. Him as a blood traitor, a being whose very existence threatened the purity of the Empire's genetic chain. And as sirens wailed and Earth's remaining defense grids began auto-targeting the incoming orbital pulses, Velari, still half-conscious, in his arms, reached up and whispered, "Run, they'll unmake you." But Rourke didn't run, didn't flinch. Instead, he knelt, pressed his bloodied palm against the fallen Velari scout's neural baton, and let the interface wrap around his arm like a serpent, sending a shockwave through his nervous system that uploaded tactical command data in a scream of symbols. And suddenly, he knew he saw every Velari position, every vulnerable drone, every power core fluctuation in their grand flagship hand, with Valeris blood inside him and Earth's fire in his soul. Rourke rose not as a soldier anymore, but as something else entirely, a bridge between extinction and evolution, and he called into the wind for Earth's rebels, pirates, hidden is forgotten mercenary fleets, anyone still breathing and angry, rallying them under a new banner, not of Earth, not of Velari, but of those unwilling to die on their knees. And shockingly, the call was answered not just from Earth, but from Velari deserters, subraces long enslaved by the Crown Mind, even rogue high fragments who saw in Rourke's blood the impossible hope of freedom. And as he stood inside the wreck of a downed Velari command crawler, holding Velari's limp hand and watching the sky fill with both enemies and allies, he knew the war was no longer about planets or conquest. It was about what life should be allowed to feel. And so began the Battle of the Red Horizon, where fleets twisted like serpents through burning clouds, gravity imploders bloomed into miniature singularities, and through it all, Rourke piloted a hybrid stolen warship fueled by his own altered blood, the controls responding to his rage, his love, his choice, and beside him, Velari awoke, her wounds sealed by Earth nanites and alien stem code, and she saw what he'd become. Not a monster, not a puppet, but the first of something new, and She took his hand, pressed her forehead to his, and declared in the old tongue, "You are no longer other. You are ours," and their minds fused fully then, broadcasting one shared pulse across the battlefield, a signal that triggered sleeper agents inside the Velari fleet, those secretly born with emotional mutations, long hidden, now awakened, by the fusion of love and defiance, and, within moments, entire warships changed sides, mid-combat, turning their weapons on their former masters, and the Emperor, watching from orbit, saw his empire fracture, not with bombs, but with belief, and he ordered a forbidden contingency, the Crown Protocol Omega, which meant wiping not just Earth, but the entire solar system, sterilizing it with a quantum fusion chain that would burn for 1,000 years. And, as the ignition countdown began, Rourke and Velari had mere minutes to do the unthinkable: board the Emperor's flagship and kill a god. Asterisk. They launched through the Asheringed atmosphere in a stolen hybrid assault craft stitched together with Earth's iron and Velaris' living alloy, its cockpit wired into Rourke's pulse, reacting to every beat of his heart as they spiraled upward toward the monstrous capital vessel, hanging in orbit like a cathedral of judgment. The Crown Mind flagship, a vessel older than most stars, pulsing, with psionic tendrils that whispered across dimensions. And inside it waited the Emperor, not just a monarch, but a being merged with the ship itself, his consciousness distributed across organic processors and neural lattice work, so vast it bent light and memory, and as they breached its outer defenses under a cloak of Velari rebel codes and raw defiance, Velari took Rourke's hand and warned, "Once we enter, nothing human or alien will matter. It will try to rewrite who we are." And he nodded, because love, he'd learned, wasn't about being the same. It was about refusing to become anything else. And so they docked, stepped into its biomechanical corridors, pulsing with ancestral blood, every wall alive, with eyes that blinked without lids, and were greeted, not by guards, but by projections, visions of their worst regrets. Rourke's old squad screaming his name as they died in a jungle ambush he survived, Velari's mother begging her not to betray the line. Children they could have had, futures erased by Warrond, yet they walked forward, refusing to flinch, until at last they stood before the Emperor's true form, suspended like a god puppet, in a throne of bone and starlight, his voice echoing not in words, but in judgments. Ancient and final, you were meant to die apart. And instead, you fused your weakness into a weapon, and Rourke stepped forward, growled, "You call it weakness. Then die by it," and unleashed a pulse from his bonded blood. A waveform of pain and freedom encoded with both human defiance and Velari compassion, striking the throne and shattering its lattice. But the Emperor didn't die. He evolved, splitting into 3 mirrored projections, each one attacking a different part of their consciousness, past, present, and potential. And the battle that followed wasn't just fists and plasma, it was existential, with Rourke fighting a version of himself that had chosen vengeance over love, and Velari facing a future where she became her father, cold and absolute. And in the heart of this chaos, bleeding from wounds that weren't physical, they found each other again, clasped hands, and whispered a final coda, neuroempathy, trigger they'd designed for this moment, knowing it would destroy everything within a 50-kilometer radius, including one of them, depending on whose body rejected the overload first. And they kissed as they activated it, time fracturing into light and sorrow, the Emperor screaming in fractal collapse as his throne imploded. And in the final nanosecond, Rourke shoved Velari into a stasis pod embedded in the wall, locking her in suspended safety while the overload consumed him. And then, silence, and fire, and black, and black. She awoke inside the silence of the stars, floating within the cracked shell of a stasis pod, coated in ash and sorrow, her body aching with a pain that wasn't physical, but soul deep. And as her fingers twitched and light flickered dimly around, her Velari's mind rushed back, not to war, not to empire, but to him, to Rourke, to the final second when he chose her life over his, sealing her inside that pod with a single glance that said everything they never had time to say. And as the pod unlocked and ejected her into the ruined remains of the Emperor's flagship, she saw the aftermath of the overload, walls scorched into molten bone, dimensional tiers sealed shut with fused time folds, and the throne shattered, relic empty of consciousness. And, for a moment, the galaxy felt quieter than death, until the whisper came, faint at first. Through the blood-linked neural thread still humming faintly in her mind, a voice she knew better than her own, "I'm still here." And Velari collapsed to her knees, gripping the floor as his memories, fractured and partial, pulsed through the broken link, revealing that Rourke's consciousness had not been destroyed, but uploaded, merged into the remnants of the Crown Mind's dying AI shell, now hidden deep in the debris, flickering between awareness and digital oblivion. And she swore then, with stars burning behind her and tears turning to crystal on her cheeks, that she would find him, rebuild him, resurrect him. And so she did what no Velari had ever dared. She fused her blood again, willingly, with Earth technology, building a prototype shell for his Minda synthetic body, shaped like his old one, but powered by alien bioflux and Memorico code. And, over the course of 37 days and nights without sleep, Velari worked in the orbital ruins, hunted by those who believed the war wasn't truly over, protecting Rourke's flickering signal in a mobile core, until at last she uploaded the final segment, held her breath, and whispered, "Come back to me." And the synthetic body twitched, blinked, and opened its eyes, not like a machine, not like a clone, but like him, like the man who'd once promised to never let her fall alone. And though his voice was slower, his emotions emerging like storm clouds over calm water, he remembered her. And she wept in his arms, holding his metal flesh form, feeling his warmth return. And outside, the galaxy began to shift, because news spread fast. The Emperor is dead. The princess survived. The human is reborn. And from the edges of star systems, oppressed colonies and outcast fleets began rallying, not under flags, but under a symbol, a human and alien, in love, having slain a god. And the galaxy, for the first time in millennia, paused, waiting to see what came next. They stood together, flesh and metal, alien and humanan, the observation deck of a rebuilt station that once served as a Velari war beacon and now hummed with the soft light of healing, surrounded by envoys, not of governments, but of peoples, rebel clones, mind-scarred humans, exiled Velari, noble children, AI, freethinkers, and even hybrid species born from secret labs, now stepping into the sun. And, as Rourke, still adjusting to his synthetic body, flexed fingers that remembered war but now built peace, Velari reached out and took his hand, not as princess, not as leader, but simply as her, and addressed them all with a voice that cracked only once. "We were forged in fire and betrayal, but we chose love instead of fear. And now you must choose too." And in that moment, across dozens of fleets and shattered worlds, beings once divided by blood and conquest began to see each other not as enemies, but as survivors of the same trauma. And thus began the fragile architecture of the First Accord, not signed in ink or algorithm, but in shared memory. A pact not to repeat the horrors of empires past, but even peace comes with a price. And not all factions agreed. From the outer void came the Sons of the Crown, a militant remnant led by General Kotha, scarred but alive, swearing vengeance on the blood-corrupted queen and her pet machine. And as their black-armored fleet surged toward Earth, determined to destroy the symbol of unity, Rourke stood tall once more, no longer just a soldier, no longer a ghost in a shell, but a legend reborn. And, as battle lines formed once again, he made a decision that stunned even Velari. He would lead the defense alone, drawing their fire toward an uninhabited moon where a trap had been lighted. gravitational implosion field seeded with Velari tech, designed to erase any mass exceeding a fleet. And Velari screamed when he told her, "If this works, I won't come back." "But you will." But he smiled, touched her face, and said, "You saved me once, now let me save the world you gave me." And in the final battle of the Broken War, Rourke piloted the old hybrid ship's guard, beautiful, deadly, into the heart of Katha's fleet, broadcasting his voice across all channels. "You had your empire, now let them choose," and triggered the field. Watching his black ships bent and screamed in implosion, vanishing into silent fire, and, at the last moment, his consciousness fractured again, spreading across the combs, not dying, but ascending into every device, every satellite, becoming a myth coded in light. And, decades later, when children of Earth and Velari play beneath twin suns and ask their parents how peace was born, they're told the story of the soldier who loved an alien, defied a god, and became the first soul to belong not to a planet, but to the stars.